go.
Hi, and welcome to our webinar on privacy. You're going to do amazing things in the coming 3 days. But everything what you do, you really need to start thinking about privacy. I'm Tony de Bos. I'm the Global Data Protection and Privacy Leader for UI. And I'm here with my colleagues, Ellen van Meurs, Hao Dinh, and de Jong. And we'll explain a bit more how you can embed privacy in your solution. Nowadays, privacy has become really important, and we hear this in the news every day. Also, the EU has found the privacy more and more important. That's why we have, since 3 years, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is really putting strong regulation on privacy and personal data. And you might think personal data is a simple concept, but there's much more behind this. And my colleague de Jong will explain a bit more about that.
Thanks, Tony. So indeed, let's go back to basics and unpack some of the terminology that we're using. So when we talk about personal data, it's much more than just your name and address and some other very obvious identifiers that you can be thinking about. In essence, it means any piece of information that you could relate back to an identified or identifiable natural person. That's you and I, the data subjects. And in the context of some of the challenges that you're going to be tackling, so for instance, if you're building an app to inform the public about the current crisis or provide or allow them to report symptoms, probably the most frequent categories you'll be working with is location data and health data. And just a note on health data, this is considered a special category of personal data, so it's subject to even more severe protection mechanisms. Obviously, Tony touched upon it. We have the GDPR, and any personal data that is processed is subject to this regulation, and consequences for non-compliance with that not only include fines, but also crucially reputational damage. So we've seen that in the news. The end consumers really expect privacy to be built into the solutions that they're using. If you're going to be working on one of your challenges on the next 3 days that includes the collection of personal data, what's key to remember is that the more little pieces of information you collect from the individual, the data subject, the more likely it is that you can trace that back to identify the person. So from the get-go, start by asking yourself, what is the minimum amount of personal data that I really need to still fulfill the purpose, and be transparent about both collecting and how you're also going to use that data. So that's a little bit of the theory background. If we go to the next slide, we're going to talk you through 2 very practical concepts for making this happen in practice and for allowing you to embed privacy in your project right from the start. And once that is following the principles of privacy by design, and it's also performing a specific type of risk assessment, which we call the data protection impact assessment. So let's learn a little bit more about those 2 concepts.
So thank you, Hannah. I think going from the theoretical to the more application side, it's important to note that our current technologies bring almost endless possibilities with them. That's why the hackathon is such a powerful way to bring creative minds like yourself together to fight this crisis. However, as Hannah already mentioned, privacy should not be taken lightly and should be considered from the start. And privacy by design is a powerful concept to guide you during the application development phases. The concept is that you need to build privacy directly into your applications at the design phase. In this way, you ensure the right level of privacy and the appropriate controls to protect data. Privacy by design consists of 7 important principles, which can guide you during your design, development, and deployment. The main takeaway of the 7 principles is that you should take responsibility and have transparency over the privacy and security of the data you collect, store, and distribute. And to make it a bit more practical, we have collected a set of privacy by design questions to consider during your design.
Well, really interesting questions, Hao, but can we practice 1 or 2? I think that as the team also should do when they're building a new innovative solution.
Of course we can.
So how do you protect the anonymity of every user?
I think it's important to first of all understand what type of data you collect, to understand how, if you are required to collect them, how you can anonymize them by taking away important recognizable pieces of data like addresses, like connections, etc. from that data, and then store them and secure them while you do that.
Okay. But is that just removing a bit of information, or is this a really more complex question? Because it seems like a simple question now.
It seems like a very simple question, but there's always a trade-off between, for example, effectivity and to identify a exact person that can be marked and be traced, etc., versus the privacy aspects of it. And I think you always need to take the privacy a bit more heavier than you use it as any functionality. And in a way, you can connect the dots even without using the personal information. But that's a challenge on itself. But really, and that's what we want to give the participants, is to really think about this hard question.
Yeah, really interesting questions which you can ask yourself. But this also brings us to the data privacy impact assessment, because data privacy impact assessment is really about trying to find the balance between the rights of an individual, a person, and the measures you're going to take. And there should be a clear balance between what you want to achieve and how you're going to protect the rights of a citizen. But Ellen, maybe you can explain a bit more about data privacy impact assessments.
Yes, definitely, because that's indeed the second step of the two parts that we're going to explain today. So how to embed privacy with the data protection impact assessment. So what is it exactly? It is actually a specific type of risk assessment, and it allows you to identify and mitigate risks that are associated with the personal information that you collect, that you store, or that you use from the user of the application. So the completion of this assessment is actually required under GDPR when you process high-risk processing activities. So as Hannah already mentioned, high-risk processing activities are, for instance, tracking someone's location, or are, for instance, health data that you collect from an individual. So with this information, you can, in relation to your COVID app, determine what the risks are associated with. We actually have a template for that. It's at the bottom of this particular slide. It is from the GDPR Data Protection Impact Assessment template. And with this, you actually can take into account, while developing your application, what steps you need to take in order to mitigate those risks that are associated. We also have a few questions for you in order to actually ask yourself continuously throughout the development on how to take privacy at the heart of your application, how to take it actually into account when developing it, such an app.
Okay, thanks, Ellen. So we come to the close of the webinar, and I think 3 things we tried to explain today. So first of all, it's all about identifiable personal data, which is much more than just personal data. 2, start thinking about privacy by design from step 1 in your process. And 3, use the template to validate whether you included the right measures to protect the rights of the citizen. And with that, I think you really embed privacy from the start and make a much stronger solution to the jury at the end of the hackathon. Well, with that, we're going to close, and we wish you all the luck in the coming days. Good luck, guys.
Good luck, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.